Hello, welcome to Groupthink. My name is Crispin Rovere, and today we're going to be talking about Trump and Syria, Turkey and the Kurds. The question being, did Trump just abandon the Kurds? This is a really complicated region of the world, and I'm going to preamble this by talking about Assad in Syria and his background and some of the rhetoric that's surrounds him and his cult. Bashar al-Assad, who's the current sort of nominal ruler of Syria, the leader of the government, he is in the Alawite minority himself. So he's a minority ruler in terms of sect and ethnicity. He was never meant to be the leader of Syria. His older brother was the one groomed for that role, while Bashar was sent to London to learn ophthalmology. And I would first of all submit to the people listening that if your goal in life is to be an eye surgeon, then dominance over a large region with a bloody civil war is not where you anticipate yourself to be. And so it was only through the untimely death of his brother that he was thrown into this role of being the future leader and now leader of Syria. And for a while there, he was considered to be a very moderate pro-Western figure, as you would expect from, a Western-educated professional. And to his credit, he is the protector of the minorities in Syria. So he himself is an Alawite. He was a champion of the Christians, of the Druze, and of the Kurds. And he was in Syria is a country that's about 50% Sunni Arab and the rest of these various minorities. So he did have a plurality of support. And then when we had the Arab Spring, the so-called Arab Spring, where you had the uprisings against Mubarak and Gaddafi and right across the Middle East, he was swept up in that, but for slightly different reasons, I would say. So prior to the spark that lit up the Middle East was the sort of Arab Spring. However, in Syria, it's specifically the underlying issues were the crisis created from a massive drought that happened from the years of sort of 2006 to 2011. And that created all kinds of instability in the country, significant migration of people, a lot of dispossession, and a lot of anger towards the government who was unable to provide for the Syrian people effectively. And that's how the country descended into civil war. That's the underlying cause and what has fueled it for so long. You had, along with the Arab Spring, people like Hillary Clinton and John McCain strongly advocating for arming of the rebels. These rebels ultimately became ISIS, of course, and ultimately the enemy of the United States because of what the horrible crimes against humanity that they were committing, including against US citizens. All the while, Assad was seen as the ally of these minorities, including the Kurds, with support, of course, from Russia and others, and Iran. And then you had Donald Trump during the 2016 campaign saying, look, if Assad wants to fight ISIS, if Russia wants to fight ISIS, then that is in our strategic interest, that I don't have to like Assad to work with him to meet our mutual goals. So that was Donald Trump's orientation pre-election, and I would say if not for the influence of people like Mike Pompeo, that would still be his orientation. Mike Pompeo is much more pro-Saudi, much more anti-Iran, and sees Syria primarily as a proxy theatre rather than as Trump, I think, saw it, which was a civil war more contained between ISIS and Assad. Nevertheless, Donald Trump's objective was to defeat ISIS. And he did that rather effectively. Even his critics acknowledged that the change in strategy after his election proved effective and a sort of a game changer for ISIS. Now that he has defeated ISIS, largely, he wants to withdraw. And to President Trump's credit, he would be the first US president ever, in my view, to have entered the Middle East and avoided mission creep. But it does leave open the question what happens to the Kurds, because he did partner with the Kurds. The Kurds have suffered immensely. First of all, in northern Iraq under Saddam Hussein, they were a victimized minority. A lot of the chemical weapons that were subsequently used in the Iran-Iraq war were tested on Kurds. And then the Kurds, just simply fighting for their own autonomy in Syria, became slaves of ISIS and shipped all over the Middle East. And they partnered with the United States, trusting the United States would be there to support them once the ISIS had been defeated. So the question is, did Trump then just abandon them? And that is, a difficult question simply because the objective was to defeat ISIS. It wasn't to create an independent Kurdistan. And the alliance, quote unquote, between Trump and the Kurds was simply of convenience. There was no formal alliance. And so now when Turkey is moving into northern Syria, in that 30-mile zone, the United States is a treaty ally with Turkey. So let's talk about Turkey as well, because this is obviously a key player. Turkey was founded by an individual called Kemal Ataturk after the Ottoman Empire collapsed after World War I. Ataturk was a very secular, pro-Western sort of a guy who wanted to create a modern nation state whose future he perceived was largely tied to Europe, and he wanted to reduce the influence of religion in his own new state. And so the Turkish military, because he was a famous general during the World War I Ottoman campaign, he was the leader of the Turks at Gallipoli, fought against Australians, in fact, and did so very effectively and honourably. He was idolised by the new Turkish military, and the Turkish military became the vanguard of what became known as the Kemalist tradition, the secular, modern, anti-religious sort of structure. And to be a leader in the Turkish military, even today, you have to basically reject any form of Islamism. This proved, effective in terms of modifying and modernising Anatolia. However, it also led to some disparities and prejudices and unfair laws. And so Erdogan, when he was first elected, I remember this clearly, Erdogan was elected as a leader of an Islamist party, but as a moderate. He wanted to reform some of the more militantly secular exclusionary laws that basically prevented a lot of people from engaging in public life. So, for example, women in Turkey were not allowed to wear a headscarf in any government building. And that meant that the vast majority of women in Turkey were unable to attend university. So it was little laws like this that he said, look, I don't want us to become an Islamist country. I just want to create a plurality of religious freedom, much like what we see in the West, much like we see in the rest of the EU. And this will involve very moderate changes to legislation. And this is something that people around the world, including myself, supported initially. And the idea was that this would make Turkey ready for EU membership. So during the Cold War, Turkey was a close ally of the United States. They even hosted American nuclear weapons during the 1950s. They were famously removed as part of the secret protocols after the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. And so Turkey was a very important frontline state for the United States in that global challenge, particularly during the Afghan war between the Soviet Union and Afghanistan. And so the United States became to rely on Turkey and was sort of supportive of Turkey's integration into the EU once the EU became clear that that was going to expand after the Cold War era. However, that relationship really soured, mainly due to the concerns of the French and the Germans, but particularly the French, that they never wanted Turkey to join the EU under any circumstances. That became clear enough in subsequent years. And the reason, the pretense was that, Turkey's not naturally European, 97% of its territory is in Asia, it's, really has a different cultural background, it wouldn't suit the European kind of identity. But in reality, it was largely to do with the European Parliament. European Parliament seats are allocated based on population. Turkey has 90 million people that would effectively break up the monopoly that the Germans and the French have on the EU Parliament, that Franco-German Empire. So the French are just never going to allow that to happen. And when the Turks became aware of this, then the sort of moderate aspect, the restraining thing in their domestic policy began to stall, and they became more and more willing to entertain Islamist policies, Sharia legislation, that sort of thing. And with the great resistance of the Turkish military, because they considered themselves the vanguard of the Kemalist tradition, they didn't like the direction that things were going in. And so Erdogan, through a series of quite powerful manipulative steps, managed to reduce the power of the military in Turkish politics and then purge his rivals. You would remember that time when there was an abortive coup in recent years, where subsequently Erdogan then went and purged 10,000 people from public service, from the military, from academia, basically anyone who opposed him. And now he's an autocratic despot. And this has freed his hand to really target, to play to Sunni, prejudices, to really target Kurds in, the north of Syria and in southern Turkey. So there is this sort of souring of relations between Turkey and the West, which has pushed Turkey further into the orbit of Russia and China. The relationship between Russia and Turkey has been rocky at times, but they're deepening their partnership every day, and in particular between Turkey and China. So the One Belt, One Road initiative Turkey has signed up to, and they are, huge amounts of investment from China is going into Turkey. Turkey is the one country in the world that China listens to, the leadership listens to, on the Uyghur issues to do with the Islamic minority in China, largely because China recognizes that it needs to keep Turkey on side, so they maintain that dialogue. And that is a huge risk for the United States. That Turkey was such an asset during the Cold War. To lose Turkey to China's orbit means that China has an uncontested sphere of influence in all of Western Asia. And the United States just cannot allow that to happen, not even for the Kurds. So why is that so important? Well, Turkey occupies perhaps the most strategic point in the whole world. Between Constantine and Columbus, the Bosphorus, the connection between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean, the European continent and Asia, was the most strategic point on Earth. And that is why the Eastern Roman capital was built there at Constantinople and now Istanbul. And then large numbers of people in Anatolia. Anatolia is a huge crossroads for most of the world's trade, for most of its history until the New World was discovered. Even the whole of the European family of languages is from that region. Ancient Hittite is the progenitor of Proto-European languages. And so to lose Turkey at a time when the global balance of power is shifting back to a pre-industrial age era would be catastrophic for the United States. The United States needs Turkey as a frontline ally. And however bad Erdogan might be, however resentful the Turkish people are towards Europe, the United States simply cannot afford to allow Turkey to drift further and further into China's orbit, because if they become formal allies, then China has the entire Asian continent effectively at its control and can focus entirely on pushing the United States out in the Pacific, past even Guam, back to Hawaii. So this is a critical issue for the United States and for the rest of the world. We need to improve our relationship with Turkey. And that is just, an unfortunate reality. That doesn't in any way diminish sympathy for the Kurds. And there have, been steps to say, look, we don't want to sell the Kurds down the river. The American Congress has made its views very clear on that. Trump has, dealt with Erdogan to kind of come up with a ceasefire and a truce. But nevertheless, this can't be at the marginalization of Turkey.